Welcome to the Manifestation Method. I'm your host, Ayelet Polonsky, therapist, coach, and Jewish neo-shaman. Here we blend the wisdom of psychology, spirituality, and Kabbalah to empower you with tools for living your most authentic life, filled with love, abundance, and healing. Through somatic, narrative, and hypnotherapy, I've developed the Manifestation Method to guide your soul's transformation and the realization of your true self. Let's rise together. To dive deeper into manifesting your most authentic life, visit ayeletpolonsky.com. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Manifestation Method podcast. Today, we're going to be speaking about a topic that I think is just relevant to all of humanity, all human beings, not just humanity, not just human beings. I think it's relevant even like in every structure that exists in the universe, right? And that topic is boundaries. We see boundaries across people. We see boundaries across cells, right? You think healthy cell, cancer cell, one attacks the other. And it's that point where they meet that the communication happens and where potential boundaries can be crossed. We see this across nations. We see this in nature. Boundaries is something that is just so prevalent in existence that I just don't think we can get away with not having a whole conversation on the topic of boundaries. And so my goal with you listening today is that by the end of this episode, you'll have a much deeper understanding of what boundaries are, how they work, how to set them, right? Sometimes it's really hard to set boundaries if it's not something that we've been taught. What boundaries look like. I mean, it's really an art form. It's an art form, setting boundaries. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I love this subject. It's been something that I've been really investigating for the last 2 years. So let's hop in.
Yeah, so Ayelet, let's just start with the simple, what are boundaries?
Yeah, what are boundaries? What are boundaries? Okay. I would say that boundaries are the energetic, emotional, and physical limits that we set in order to protect our well-being, to honor our needs, to create space for what is fully a true yes in our system, for what feels fully aligned. And boundaries is just a really holy act of self-care. In other words, they define what we will and what we will not accept in our relationships, what we will and what we will not accept at work, in our daily lives, right? And I think it's also very important to clarify that boundaries are not walls, right? They are not meant to block love. They're not meant to block opportunities or to block abundance. Instead, boundaries they act as filters, right? And some boundaries can be thicker, some boundaries can be thinner, some boundaries can be fluid. We can have a boundary one day and then a year later it changes, or a week later it changes. So, boundaries are not these things that are static, never moving. And sometimes we have boundaries that are in resonance with our core values, so they do remain intact for the rest of our lives. But I don't think there's like one hard rule as to what a boundary needs to look like. But what I do see boundaries as is they act as filters that allow in only what is in resonance with our highest self. Okay, I think that was a really good definition of boundaries. I'll say that again.
It was.
Right? Like boundaries are filters, what did I say? That allow in only what is of our highest good, only what is in true resonance with our highest self. So really at their core, and this is also really important, at their core, boundaries are an expression of self-worth. Ooh, that was also really good. Boundaries are an expression of self-worth. They communicate to ourselves and to the world that I honor my own energy, I prioritize myself, I trust my needs, and I am worthy of respect, love, and even abundance. So boundaries, to give an example, can be as simple as saying no to commitments that feel draining, right? Or they can be as big and profound as walking away from relationships that no longer serve us, right? Or it can even be as empowering as demanding compensation for our gifts, for our service. So from a manifestation perspective, energetically, boundaries actually create the vessel or the container for manifestation. When we set clear boundaries or when we set clear standards, we are signaling to the universe exactly what we are a yes for, exactly what we are available for. And without these boundaries, we may unconsciously allow misaligned energy or energy that is not of our highest service. We might allow that into our space, which can end up actually diluting our focus, diluting the intention of our desire, and it makes it much harder to attract what we truly desire. So,
Wow,
kind of
Ayala,
just
can you repeat that again? Like the diluting of desire, like that relate that the how those play with manifestation?
how that plays with man. Can you turn up your? Is it possible to turn up your volume, Aviva?
My volume's all the way up.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. Here,
Okay.
I'll ask the question again.
Uh-huh.
Can you repeat what you just said about how when we have a lack of boundaries, it actually dilutes our intention and our desire in terms of what we want to manifest?
Totally. So from a manifestation perspective, when a person is not clear on what it is they want and they're confused about their intention. So I'll give an example. I get clients who come to me and they say, I want to manifest financial abundance. And so my first question to them would be, okay, what does financial abundance look like in detail? How much money is financial abundance for you? And then they just get like flushed in the face, right? They don't even know how to answer it. They start to like tremble. Like they have no real understanding of what the clarity around their intention is. Or if someone comes to me, I want to manifest my soulmate, I want to manifest my life partner, right? Okay, so what are your non-negotiables? And then they freak out. They can't get clear on what are your core values? What are the core values you want your partner to have? And they freak out thinking like, "Oh no, I'm limiting myself by getting super super clear." But no, from a manifestation perspective, confused energy or confused consciousness manifests more confusion in your life, right? Whereas clarity is king in manifestation. The clearer we are about what we want, the more attuned we are to setting our intention in the quantum field, right? We're actually computing and inputting information in every moment based on our thoughts, our speech, our frequency. And that information is then being reprogrammed and manifested back into our 3D, right? So confusion manifests more confusion, clarity manifests a clear result. So I encourage you when this boundary work around manifesting in particular, like don't allow your focus to be diluted because it'll only make it harder to attract what you desire. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, amazing. It's
Okay.
really like clarity is king, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. And true boundaries come from self love, not from fear.
Hmm.
True boundaries come from self love, not from fear. But so many of us get this wrong, right? Boundaries are not about controlling others or shutting others out of our lives, right? Some might be under the illusion or impression that, oh, this relationship isn't serving me, so I'm just going to disengage. That's a boundary that's coming out of fear, and that's not going to get a person to the true intimacy that they desire, right? So what boundaries are, they are about standing in our truth and trusting that we don't need to overextend, overgive, or self sacrifice to be worthy of love, success, or abundance. Okay, that also so important. I mean, I myself get stuck in this trap. It's like oftentimes I'll find myself as in this position where me being of service to my community, to my clients, to my husband, to my friends is is a direct has a direct correlation with my value. right?
Mm-hmm.
Or my worthiness of receiving their love. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a big one that I've had to really alchemize in my system or relearn. And I'm always in a process of relearning this, that you are inherently unique and inherently valuable and inherently lovable. You do not need to overcompensate and overgive and overextend in order for you to receive the love that is inherently your birthright, right? So instead, we allow what is meant for us to come through on our terms. And if this means that a particular person does not want to love you because you are not overgiving to that person, then that's just not your person, right?
Correct. And I think too, like so many of us struggle with setting boundaries, especially when we're trying to attract abundance and love, because for the exact reasons that you're saying, like it can bring up these real fears of, like, if you don't know what a boundary is, it's like, oh, I'm putting up a wall, like I'm blocking a certain flow to me. So like how can people start on really understanding that deeper and like doing practical steps to creating healthy boundaries that actually attract more love and attract more abundance into their life?
Yeah, well, I think just starting with the premise that boundaries are freaking hard, especially when we didn't grow up in an environment where boundaries was part of the language or the education, right? I didn't grow up with boundaries. This is something I've had to learn, and it's been a beautifully excruciating dance, right? And I say beautiful also because it's freed up so much inner space in my system. And like, wow, it's there's so much value that comes from setting clear boundaries, but it's excruciating because it's like learning a new language often. And so, for me, just it's really cute for any of the parents out there. I really encourage you to start teaching your kids boundaries at a young age. And the way that I do this with my kids is I play a tickle game with them where I'll tickle, 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 and we'll say go, stop, go. I'll have them say go or stop, and I'll tickle them, and then they'll say stop, and I'll immediately I'll stop and I'll say boundaries. I'm stopping. I respect your boundaries. And then they'll say go, and I'll tickle them again. And then they'll say stop, and I immediately say boundaries. Stop means stop, right? Or I'll tell them no is a full sentence. If one of my kids says no to the other kid, no is a full sentence, and I'll reiterate the word boundaries in the way I speak to my kids over and over and over again. But now I'm going on a tangent. Back to the question: why do most people or many people struggle with setting boundaries? I think in particular in the area of love, and I think, or even in the area of abundance, really. And I think it's because deep down, so many of us associate boundaries with rejection, loss, or disconnection. I know I speak for myself, right? I have a core value that has the word intimacy and connection written all over it, right? I meet a person and I just want to like soul dance with that person and go straight to the deep end. My friends laugh. They're like, there's no shallow end in a yeah, let's pull. It's like deep right off the bat, right?
Absolutely.
And I know that for me, setting boundaries has often been really challenging because me setting a boundary becomes equated with a potential disconnect, right? First, it's this thought in my head. If you set a boundary, you're going to disappoint them. They're not going to like the boundary. If you disappoint them, they're going to feel disconnected from you. And there you go. You've severed yourself from your core value of connection and intimacy. So it's like I'm like in this place where I'm cornered between a rock and a hard place, right? So I think this struggle or this fear of rejection and loss often comes with a subconscious fear that if the other person says no, right? Or if we say no, let's say we say no, we set a standard or we walk away from a misaligned situation, then we're going to be pushing away opportunities, we're going to be pushing away love, we're going to be pushing away abundance. So for those manifesting love or in a process of manifesting a partner, boundaries I find can feel especially tricky because many people have been conditioned to believe that love requires sacrifice, compromise, and self abandonment. Okay. Now, I will say, as a married woman, there is a degree of sacrifice and compromise that is present in every partnership, every relationship, not just romantic. But it's when it gets to that point of self abandonment where we're really betraying ourselves, that's when it becomes a problem, right? So if someone grew up in an environment where love was conditional,
Hmm.
where let's say they had to overgive or they had to people please or they had to be easygoing in order to receive affection, then for these people growing up as into adulthood, setting boundaries can feel unsafe. It can feel as though they are risking the very love that they crave,
Mm.
right? And when it comes to abundance, the struggle around setting boundaries often comes from a scarcity mindset.
Hmm.
So if someone has a fear that opportunities are limited or that they have to take what they can get, they might end up overextending themselves. They might say yes to things that drain them, or they might allow underpayment or undervaluation, which can block the very abundance that they're trying to attract.
Right.
Right? So at the core, boundary struggles, like the struggles around boundaries, stem from self-worth wounds, right? If someone deeply believes that their needs, their desires, their energetic limits matter, then boundaries become second nature,
Hmm.
right? But if there's a subconscious fear of unworthiness, of not being enough, or of losing connection, then boundaries can feel like a threat instead of an act of self-honoring. And this is why I would say inner work is the key when it comes to boundaries. Like I was really put through the ringer a couple years ago and I went through a whole life workshop around learning boundaries, setting boundaries, honoring my own boundaries, and what's really come out the other end, and I'm still in process with this, is an internal shift in my belief system, an internal knowing that I am inherently worthy of love and abundance and connection without needing to be the good girl, without needing to impress, without needing to overextend myself, without needing to betray my own needs for the sake of others. Right? So boundaries not only become easier with time, but they also become magnetic. Right? The universe responds to clarity, like I said. And when we stop entertaining what doesn't serve us, then we make more space for what is in true alignment for us.
Amazing. And what is the difference between setting boundaries from a place of fear versus a place of alignment when you're starting out?
Whew, yeah. I'd say the difference between setting boundaries from a place of fear versus a place of alignment comes down to the energetic, the intention behind them, right? So let's break this down a little bit. What do boundaries from fear look like? When a boundary comes from fear, they often manifest as really rigid, really reactive, even explosive. Um, and they manifest as like a defense mechanism, right? I need to defend something. I need to protect something. And
Hmm.
so it like brings out a very reactive place in us, right? And so these boundaries can often stem, or boundaries that come from fear can often stem from past wounds, insecurities, or the fear of being hurt, rejected, abandoned, taken advantage of. So, some examples of what this might sound like if we like really access the voices in our heads. When a boundary comes from fear, it can sound like, I can't trust people, so I have to shut them out.
Mm.
It might sound like, if I don't say yes, then they're not going to love me. Or it might sound like, I have to control everything, otherwise, I'm going to get hurt. Right? So these boundaries often create walls rather than filters. And they can block potential opportunities. They can block, when boundaries come from fear, it can block out love. It can block abundance because they stem from an energetic inner space of contraction, right?
Hmm.
Which is a space that's designed to protect rather than empower.
Right.
So fear based boundaries can also feel anxious, disconnected, even aggressive, right? Because they're often rooted in the need for control versus trust. Now, on the other side of that coin, right, boundaries that stem from an inner space of alignment, like what does that energetic feel like? They feel aligned boundaries feel expansive, they feel empowering. They're rooted in self worth. Like, I know when I'm setting an aligned boundary, I walk away from that interaction just feeling like all of my inner children, like Ayelet's little 4, 5, 6 year olds, are all there, like cheering me on, like, yay, yay, you prioritized us. You're there for us. Right. And so, like, instead of being reactive and coming from that fear place, alignment is more proactive, right? It's set from a deep knowing of who you are, what you deserve, and what is truly in resonance with your highest self. So, a couple examples of what aligned boundaries might sound like if you're accessing like the inner voices in your head. It might sound like I honor my energy and I choose to engage only in relationships that uplift and support me. Okay. I choose to engage in relationships that uplift and support me. Hold on. There was a ding there. So let me 20. Okay. Aligned boundaries could sound like I trust that saying no to what drains me makes space for what will nourish me, right? There's a lot of trust and surrender there. And then another thing could be I don't need to control others. I just need to be clear on what I will and will not accept. I see that as a big one, right? So these boundaries, they are fluid yet firm. They act as an open door rather than a locked gate. They're an invitation for deeper levels of connection. I think some people see boundaries as this like really scary thing because they feel it's inevitable. If I set a boundary, then that's it. There's disconnection. We're going to have to walk away from each other, right? And that feels like annihilation, at least for me sometimes,
Totally.
right? Whereas no, boundaries are an invitation. Like assuming that the relationship is based on a foundation of mutual trust, respect, and vulnerable communication and commitment, right? Assuming all the right ingredients are there for the relationship and you're both showing up to the table, then I find and have found that setting boundaries has only been an invitation to let whoever I'm speaking to in on my inner world and hope that there is enough mutual love and respect that they will honor my boundaries. And if they do not honor my boundaries, that's also okay. They don't have to be a yes, right? And hopefully it's not crossing too big of a boundary that it'll cause me to constrict and then disengage, right? There's hopefully room for like a lot of hearing the other person, a lot of, again, mutual understanding and trust, because I find that aligned boundaries create space for love. They create space for aligned opportunities. And from the realm of manifestation or abundance, aligned boundaries signal to the universe that I trust myself, I trust my life, I know what I want, and I'm only available for what serves my highest good.
Hmm.
Okay, so like kind of like to sum this up, I think fear-based boundaries come from lack, come from a belief that you need to defend yourself, you need to defend opportunities, you need to defend love, right? While aligned boundaries come from abundance. They
Hmm.
come from the deep knowing that you are worthy and that what is meant for you will meet you in a space of mutual respect, integrity, and harmony.
Yeah, it sounds like, especially when you're just getting started with boundaries, it just takes a lot of patience. Something that you kept saying was the space, like making space, and also taking space too. Like when you also, with boundaries, like you say, it's in the beginning. I mean, boundaries are always challenging. It's like a lifelong practice to, and it's a lifelong dance with other people. Like it's not just about us, it's like not just our growth, it's like we are constantly being met by forces that are completely beyond our control, situations, people, other people's relationship to their boundaries, etc. Like I'm just am thinking about how important it is when you're getting started just to being really patient with yourself and patient with other people so that these extremes of wanting to protect yourself and then wanting to assert your boundaries and wanting to come from like, is it alignment? Am I making this out of alignment? Am I making this out of fear? Like, that can be a really intense place to be at when you are starting to make these boundaries, and just even taking space when you do get a response from someone, or taking space for yourself to really check in. Is this coming from an expansive place? Ooh, I'm being met with some crunchy, like wanting to constrict feelings, and my natural reaction is to either pull away or build up a wall because that's my old idea of boundaries. Like, I just am really seeing how important it is just to be really patient in this process.
Yeah, I would say patient and also really compassionate towards oneself. Like when you're on, it's like learning a new language. So when diving into the world of boundaries, because it's not a given. It's something that we need to be taught. I think just a lot of kindness and compassion alongside the patience for sure. Give yourself a lot of grace. You're not meant to get it right. Boundaries are meant to be messy. They're meant to be messy, and oftentimes boundaries are meant to be resisted, right? Like
Wow, that's such a line. Boundaries are meant to be resisted. Like, when we make the boundary, it's like causes resistance in ourselves sometimes, and from like the an outside in.
and we see this from a very young age, right? This is not a phenomenon that is, only reserved for adults. I see this with my kids, right? I have young kids, and when I ask them to do something, sometimes the answer is no, I don't want to, right? And so boundary, it's like when we make requests or when we have needs, or if I tell my kids, you can only have dessert after you eat dinner, right? That's a boundary. And it doesn't mean that they're meant to receive it with a lot of grace. Boundaries are meant to be resisted. And so I think there's an art form to the person communicating the boundary, to learn how to communicate it with love. I remember one of my mentors once told me, when we think of boundaries, we should think of it like this. When you're on an airplane and the flight attendant at the beginning of the flight is going through all of the rules and regulations in case of an emergency, right? And she says, before you put the mask on the person next to you or on a child, always put the mask on yourself first, right? So boundaries is seen in the same light. Boundaries is me first, you second, with love. Me first, you second, with love. Right. And so, in learning how to articulate these boundaries, I find that the most important thing is to always have in mind, am I articulating this boundary with love? Not from a place of aggression, not from a place of reactivity, right? But am I communicating this from a place of, I want us to be on the same page. I want to make this work. I really value you. And this just isn't working for me. I wonder if there's a way that we can come to some sort of understanding, because what I do find is that when people are often first learning to set boundaries, and I'm sure this happens even if they've been working with boundaries for decades, right? Sometimes it can come across as aggressive, right?
And sometimes your protector parts are really flared up when a boundary is crossed. And I also, too, like, I can even speak for myself. There's times where I know what is my boundary, and there's times when I don't know, and the way I'm responding is a clue that my boundaries have been crossed. It's like telling me, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's because many people struggle with setting boundaries until they reach a breaking point.
Yeah.
Right? It's like we're not setting a boundary until we've built up enough resentment against the person where we literally can't hold it anymore, and then we become explosive.
Right.
Right? Which is why learning this art, it's a type of communication, is so critical, because I think how many of us are like really saying yes when we mean no, right? Like someone will ask us to do something, we say yes, but we really mean no. And meanwhile, I'm blaming the other person for asking me in the first place and putting me in this potential situation where I could feel discomfort in myself, right? And then I'm building up resentment towards the other person because I said yes to them when I really meant no. And then all of a sudden we explode when really it's like, what if we just communicated our boundary from the beginning, right? Instead, we can, instead of clearly and calmly expressing our needs from the start, right? People suppress their feelings. They say, again, they say yes when they want to say no. They overextend themselves or they tolerate situations that don't feel good. And eventually, all of that suppressed energy builds up and bursts out as frustration, resentment, anger, right? And this can often make a boundary feel like an attack rather than an empowered choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know for me, if I'm on like the receiving end of that boundary, if it hasn't been communicated to me from the beginning, and then I'm meeting a person where they're being reactive, I can end up feeling really confused. Like, wait, I did something wrong. I didn't even know, and vice versa. If I'm building up resentment and then it comes out as frustration, and this whole time I'm creating a whole story in my head, right? Assuming that the other person knows and is on the same page as the story in my head,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I find that suppressed boundaries look like I keep saying yes to helping even though I don't want to, right? That's suppressed, right? Explosive sounds like I'm done helping you. Stop asking me for things already, right? Whereas aligned boundaries sounds like I'm happy to support when I can, but I need to prioritize my own energy right now. Right. So if someone is setting a boundary from fear rather than alignment, the energy behind it can often feel rigid, harsh, combative, right? When we don't feel fully confident in our right to set a boundary, we might even overcompensate by making it sound overly firm, really cutting, really like strict, right? Like it's like almost like we have to force the boundary in order for it to be taken seriously. So like an example of a fear-based boundary in this case would be like, I don't have time for this, leave me alone, right? Whereas like an aligned boundary would say, I really value our relationship. I just need to create some space for myself right now, right?
Right. And let's talk also about the codependent dance that happens with boundaries in boundary setting.
Whew. Yeah, this is like classic in like the post-boundary codependent dance.
Textbook.
It's pretty textbook,
Yeah.
right? So this classic codependence dance, it's like this subconscious push and pull dynamic that tends to play out when someone sets a boundary, right? The other person resists that boundary, and then the boundary setter ultimately caves or tries to make it better. They realize, oh my gosh, I set a boundary and that disappointed the other person. So now I need to come up and clean up my act and I need to create connection again and fix it, right? So this is a codependent dance. And this pattern keeps both people stuck in unhealthy roles. It often prevents true autonomy, it prevents self respect, and it just disrupts the overall emotional balance of the relationship, right? So, what I would say is like if we were to break it down into a few steps, right? We'll say step one is where the boundary is set. Okay, I'm talking about the codependent dance here, right? The boundary is set. So someone finally musters up the courage to set a boundary. Maybe they've been feeling drained, maybe they've been feeling disrespected or overextended, and then they realize that they need to advocate for their own well being.
Mm-hmm.
And so they might say something like, hey, I can't keep answering your calls late at night. I really need my rest. Okay. Now, this should be a really healthy, empowered moment. But in codependent dynamics, it really triggers an immediate reaction in the other person, which leads to the second step, which is the other person pushes back, right? So the person on the receiving end of the boundary feels rejected, feels abandoned, feels controlled, right? Even if that wasn't the intention of the boundary setter. So the person who's receiving the boundary might react with guilt tripping the boundary setter, right? Saying something like, wow, I guess I'm just a burden to you now, right? Or they might respond with manipulation. Well, if you really cared, you'd take time for me, right? Or they might respond with anger or aggression, like saying, fine, I won't ever call you again then, right? Or they might respond with victimhood. I can't believe you do this to me after everything I've done for you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this resistance taps directly into the boundary setter's core wounds, which usually revolve around guilt, fear, or disconnection, right? And it comes from a deep seated need to be seen as good or loving. I know for me, it's like the good girl wounds. Like I want to be good for everyone. I have this like good, and so I've had to do a lot of work around this, and I have come a long way, and I have a lot of work to do, but it's really empowering. Okay, so then the third step is where now the boundary setter feels uncomfortable and starts to waver on their boundary, right? So the moment the other person resists, the boundary setter then feels uneasy inside. Okay, maybe their heart races, maybe their chest tightens, or they feel an overwhelming urge to fix the situation. And so this is, and I encourage you to notice this when you do this. Okay, I know I've been guilty of this, so just notice it. It's where the old programming kicks in, especially if you grew up in environments where setting boundaries was met with punishment, rejection, shame. Okay, so instead of standing firm in their boundary, they start to question themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I was a little bit too harsh.
Yep.
Oh no, maybe I should just give in just to keep the peace. I don't want them to be mad at me. Oh, what if they see that I'm actually like not a good person because I, set such and such boundary, right? And this discomfort makes them believe that the easiest way to receive to relieve the tension is to undo the boundary, right? Which then takes us to the last step, which is the boundary setter caves or tries to fix the situation. And so it's at this stage that the boundary setter abandons their own needs in order to soothe the other person's reaction. So this can look like, backtracking and saying like, okay, maybe I can take your call sometimes, just not every night. Right. Or maybe they over explain or they justify saying things like, I'm not trying to push you away. I just have a lot going on, but maybe I can make an exception. Right. Or they'll start to appease. They'll say, I feel really bad. I'll just answer this one more time.
Right.
Or they go into over functioning mode, which is like they shift into fixer mode to make the other person feel better, often by apologizing for something that they shouldn't even need to feel apologetic for in the first place. Right. So the moment that the boundary setter caves, what they're doing is they're reinforcing the idea that their needs come second. They come second to the comfort of others. And this signals to the other person that's pushing back, right, that the cycle there's an invitation to continue this codependent cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So really this codependent cycle keeps both people stuck. It keeps them locked in disempowerment, right? Because the boundary setter never learns to trust their own voice and they remain stuck in guilt, people pleasing, over explaining. And then the boundary resistor never learns to self-regulate, right? And then they just continue to rely on control, guilt, emotional manipulation in order to get their needs met.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what's important to, you know, I think what's important to summarize all this is a breakdown of how to break the codependent dance. I think really step one should be to recognize the pattern. Awareness is always step one. It's always key. Notice the moment that you start to feel guilty, anxious, responsible for the other person. Step two, regulate your own nervous system, right? Tell yourself their reaction is not my responsibility. And then take a deep breath and lean into that truth. Their reaction is not my responsibility, right? And then the third step would be like hold the boundary with confidence. You don't need to over explain. You don't need to justify. You don't need to soften your boundary to make someone else feel okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? A simple response like, I hear you and my decision still stands is enough,
Right.
right? And then step four would be to detach from their emotional response, kind of I know it's hard, but let go for the need of for the need of approval, right? Their discomfort or their resistance does not make you bad, does not make you wrong, right? Their reaction is theirs to process, not the boundary setters, right? And then there's step five, which is practice self-validation, right? So instead of seeking reassurance from the other person, you can remind yourself, it is safe for me to have needs. I am not responsible for managing other people's emotions. Saying no does not make me unlovable, right? And I would say the last step would be about staying consistent. You're training yourself, you're rewiring yourself. The more you do it, it's like going to the gym. It gets easier and you get better at it with time, with practice. So if you find yourself setting a boundary and then backtracking, right? Then it teaches the other person that this persistence that will wear you down. Like they can come in
Right.
and you might make a mistake, and that's okay. You're not gonna. It's a learning curve. You're gonna backtrack. You're not gonna get it right every time. So just keep getting back on the track and stay consistent. Stay firm without aggression and show the other person that you really mean what you say. And I find that I see this in my husband and I. Wow, it's like he is my teacher when it comes to boundary setting. There is something about his energetic that is so stable, clear, concise. Like his yes means yes, his no means no, and there's no leakiness around it. It doesn't mean anything about the other person. It doesn't mean he doesn't love the other person. He's just so, and he's a very giving person. He's more of a yes than he is a no. But when he is a no or when he has a boundary, he communicates it with so much alignment that the other person, I never see the person he's setting a boundary with get resistant towards him because there's no leaky energy there. He's so stable.
Hmm.
With me, on the other hand, right? It's like I love people. I want whatever. It's a whole thing where there is a little bit of leaky energy that because there's leakiness there, people find a place to resist. And so it's been a beautiful journey for me, and having him as my mirror has been awesome.
Amazing. So, Ayala, can you close us out with a blessing? We really had an action-packed episode today.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like just even getting started with boundary work can seem so overwhelming, but just even doing little baby steps, it builds up to a place of more wholeness, more connection, more love in your life, less resentment. It's all good stuff.
Absolutely.
Because it's scary. It's scary work to do, but it really leads to a better place.
It's so scary, but it really, it leads to a place of deeper intimacy and deeper connection. It really does because for two people who are showing up to the relationship, there's a desire to learn about the other person and not to wrong the other person for their boundaries. We get to really, it's like, when someone I care about sets a boundary with me, it's like, oh, thank you for showing me you. Now I have more information that allows me to show up better for you. And it deepens our connection and intimacy as a result. And that's so beautiful. And so I bless you all to really experience a new level of emotional freedom with this boundary work. I bless you with grace in honoring your own boundaries. I bless you to stop fearing other people's reaction to your boundaries and to really come from a place of honoring and prioritizing your inner truth and what feels in alignment for you. Right? I bless you to no longer have to walk on eggshells around other people because you're just exuding boundaries from a place of me first, you second with love. And you're really infusing your boundaries with so much love and compassion and kindness towards the person that you're setting the boundary with. And I bless you that this boundary work becomes a real embodiment for you, that you embody these boundaries from a place that feel really wholesome, that feel like it's freeing up constricted energy from your system. And I just overall bless you to really own your sovereign self and to take care of all of your parts and all your inner children and all of your needs and to do so with also considering the other people who you're setting boundaries with so that it becomes this more beautiful, fluid dance that creates only more closeness and intimacy in your lives. All right. Thank you all for listening. I hope this episode met you in all the right places. I know it's a loaded one. So if you have any questions or comments or feedback, I'd love to hear it. Please reach out, leave a comment. And if you like this episode and there's anyone in your life, which I know we all know, who can use a little bit of a, boundary boot camp, please go ahead and share this episode with them. Share the love. Thanks so much for listening. Here's to your rising. Thank you for joining me on the manifestation method. I hope today's episode has inspired you on your journey to authenticity and abundance. Remember, your transformation begins with your mindset. If you're ready to take the next step, visit ayeletpolonsky.com for more resources and guidance. Until next time, here's to your rising.